The 2022 NHL Stanley Cup champions have been crowned. We'll do a recap of Game 6 last night and take a look at how we made out with our bracket challenge we did for the channel. Plus, we have several signings and some trade rumors concerning the Vegas Golden Knights, the New York Islanders, and should the Maple Leafs trade for JT Miller out of Vancouver. We're going to discuss an article looking at that scenario coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to go over here today. Let's start with the recap of Game 6 last night. The Colorado Avalanche are your 2022 NHL Stanley Cup champions with a big 2-1 victory to clinch the fourth and final victory and defeat the Tampa Bay Lightning 4-2 in the Stanley Cup final. It was an excellent series, a highly entertaining, great hockey, one of the better finals, in my opinion, we've seen here in recent years. By far, Tampa's toughest opponent they've faced in the last 3 years. Back-to-back appearances in the Stanley Cup final. In the words of Chris Cuthbert doing the play-by-play call for Sportsnet here in Canada, he says the dynasty is denied, the legacy begins. So we have a new champion in town. The Avalanche are defeated and they move on. We saw a lot of great things here. Jared Bednar becomes the first head coach to win championships in the East Coast Hockey League, the American Hockey League, and the NHL. He actually put in 16 years between his time as a player in the East Coast League and a coach. He played there for a long time. Obviously, his playing career never saw him rise to a high level of hockey beyond that. And then he coaches there for a long time. Like that's a league that's really, really tough, and you don't see a lot of players and coaches come out of to be a long time successful at the NHL level. So that's great for him to also win a Calder Cup and now a Stanley Cup. Like I said, first in history. Cale Makar becomes the first player ever in NHL history to win the Hobey Baker Trophy as the top player in college hockey. He gets a Calder Trophy as NHL's Rookie of the Year. He just won a Norris Trophy as the league's top defenseman. Gets the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP and now a Stanley Cup. So some record-setting people there. Nice to see some great longtime veterans like Eric Johnson, Jack Johnson, Andrew Cogliano, obviously finally get their name on the cup. McKinnon, Landeskog, Rantanen, Makar, Taves, Kumper, like they have a good set of players there. Nazem Kadri probably had the quote of the post-game interviews, talking to David Amber and Elliot Friedman. They were asking him, I think David Amber asked him about the long-time fans supporting him from his time of junior hockey playing in London, Ontario, and his time in Toronto at the Maple Leafs. Obviously a lot of support back home in his home province of Ontario. He said, what do you have to say to those people? And he said, I love you for all those who have supported me the whole time, friends, family, fans, etc. He really appreciated their support. But then he says to everyone who thought I was a liability in the playoffs, you can kiss my ass. Just probably the funniest quote, and I really shouldn't be surprised from Kadri, who's, appears to be the kind of guy who's not afraid to speak his mind. Obviously, he had his moments in the past when he was suspended numerous times, and I guess you could have labeled him a playoff liability, which is a big part of the reason why I think the Leafs traded him. I mean, they loved what he brought, they loved his contract, what he produced for that contract, but at the end of the day, they felt they couldn't trust him, I guess, that he was going to be available in the playoffs because he kept getting suspended, but he certainly grew up, matured, and gets the job done in Colorado. We've seen a lot of former Leafs go on to win the Stanley Cup after their time with the Maple Leafs. Of course, Bozak, Gunnarsson, Kessel, now Kadri. It's quite a list of them. I mean, most teams have those players that have success elsewhere, not just the Leafs, of course, but certainly, Kadri had a tremendous season. He picked a great time to become a UFA, so to speak, after certainly going into the offseason here in a major high Stanley Cup champion and having a career season. So congrats to the Avalanche, well-deserved win. On our bracket challenge we did for the channel, I'll show you the actual results. The tabulations are in, and the winner is me, actually. I actually won for a change. I've done this for a few years. I've never come close. I love to make predictions. You don't always get them right. Shockingly, I along with I think about 10 or 11 other people, picked the Avalanche to win the Cup. And I got most of my predictions right. I think the only one I really got wrong that I had going further than what they were the Florida Panthers. I think I got all my Western Conference ones correct. All the way, I believe most of the way through. The Eastern Conference, it was Florida that kind of threw me off for the most part, and I think I had one other one wrong too, but obviously it was fun. Obviously, congrats to everybody else who has come, and finished high in the standings here with our bracket challenge, and thank you for everybody for participating. Like I said, it's something I like to do every year just for fun within the community. It's not often we can actually compete against each other or anything like that. So, certainly was a lot of fun, and we'll do it again next year. For sure. On to some other NHL news today. We got a bunch of signings. We have signings in Vancouver. They've announced contracts for Guillaume Brisebois, Sheldon Dries, and John Stevens. They're all two-way deals. Brisebois and Stevens get 1 year. Sheldon Dries gets 2 years. So they're all pending for agents that get re-signed. The Florida Panthers have announced they've re-signed Matt Kiersted. He gets a two-way deal. Year one, though, is a two-way deal, whereas the second year is a one-way term. So he gets 1 year as a two-way, one as a one-way. So he's guaranteed NHL money in that second year. The Toronto Maple Leafs also announced a pretty significant signing. Defenseman Timothy Liljegren, who was set to be an RFA, gets a 2-year contract of $1.4 million. I like that signing a lot for the Leafs. I thought his contract would come in closer to $2 million. So that, to me, is a really good number. Will help their cap. And really, if you think about it, Liljegren and Giordano could be their third pair. And be a really cheap third pair, but yet possibly very productive, because Giordano signed for close to league minimum. I think he's about $800,000, I think it was, or something like that. So Gio and Liljegren can be signed for not much more than $2 million as a pair, which is really, really good. So that's good news for them. They still have Rasmus Sandin and others that need to be looked after, but a good start to their RFA business here as well. We saw the Blackhawks finally officially announced Luke Richardson as head coach, which we discussed on the channel a few days ago. And we also saw the Bruins finally officially announce a multi-year contract extension for general manager Don Sweeney, which is something we had talked about in the last couple of days as well. Those are pieces of news that they were just waiting to officially announce, which are now done. And Zdeno Chara, a longtime NHL player who's not officially retired as of yet. There was word at the end of the Islanders season that he was likely hanging him up, but according to his agent, no decision has been made, and he probably won't make an announcement either way until September. So he's going to take his good old time, which is, certainly earned the right to do so, but I have to think that, a lot of teams are going to have their business taken care of. I'm not sure if there's going to be many spots available if he does decide he'd like to play. And based on how last year went, I don't know that he's going to have a lot of options, because you can certainly tell that he's finally starting to slow down. Great leader, he could be a great asset in a lot of ways, but his on-ice play wasn't conducive, at least of an everyday spot. If he does play, I would think it'd be more in line with what we saw the Panthers do with Joe Thornton this past year, where he was there, he played, he contributed, but he wasn't an everyday member. He played in less than half of the games, was basically an extra, but was, a great presence around the room, great experience that the other players could draw off of, and that kind of thing, those intangibles that we often talk about. So we'll see where things go on that front. On to some trade rumors for today. There is word that the Vegas Golden Knights are getting interest in young defenseman Nicholas Hag, who is set to become a restricted free agent here shortly. Hag, along with a guy like Nikolai Waugh in Vegas, are a couple of guys who could be offer sheet targets. Of course, Vegas, like many teams, but especially Vegas, who are really hard up against the cap, are going to be potential victims here of teams taking advantage of their cap situation if they take a while to get these players in their contract. Of course, we saw them pick up the Shea Weber contract from the Montreal Canadiens in exchange for Evgeny Dadonov, which will very much help their situation. They subtract money, then they add a contract that they can then use to go over the cap, which is great. But they have already apparently have a verbal agreement in place to keep Riley Smith for, I think it was a $5 million contract. So that's going to obviously take up a chunk of time and obviously space on their cap. And then they have other things too. So they're far from being done here. Just because they shed some money with Dadonov, they still have more that needs to be done. And some of these younger players, I think they might have interest to keep them, but they got to move somebody. And Hag is a guy that's going to get interest. He's still in his early 20s. He's capable of playing top 4 minutes. I think he'd be a really good, attractive option to a variety of teams. We're looking at teams that either coming out of a rebuild who want younger players. We're looking at teams that are maybe want to add to their depth to take the next step. There's a lot of teams I think would have interest in a solid young D-man like him. So we'll see what happens. Vegas is going to be a busy team. They have no choice but to be, if they're going to especially if they're going to maintain all of their top players, and a lot of that means more of the supporting cast is likely going to be departing, whether they're on expiring deals, not coming back, or they're going to have to move some players, etc. The Islanders are another team I want to talk about here as well. Kevin Kurz has a new article in The Athletic exploring the possibility of maybe moving Anthony Beauvillier for a top forward defenseman. Now, of course, one of the names that comes up in this article is Jakob Chychrun in Arizona. We sometimes forget about him, as the guy's been in the rumor mill for over a year now and has not been traded as of yet, but I do suspect as we get closer to the draft or the early part of free agency that we're going to see the Coyotes pull the trigger here and Chychrun will have himself a new home. I know it's something that sounds like he wants as well as the team. It's a matter of the team finding the right deal to make the deal here get done. And of course, the article references what it's likely going to take if they want to try to obtain a player like Chychrun. And trust me, he'd be a great fit. I think most teams will have a little bit of concern over the fact that he's missed a decent amount of time with injuries, and that's probably the main drawback on Chychrun is can he stay healthy? But he's young, he's very physical, and he can be very offensive. So he's attractive in a lot of ways. He has a few years left on his term of his contract at a really good price tag. The Islanders certainly need a left-handed shot D. He fits all the boxes. He really does, possibly have himself being a potential top target for them. But the potential here is what's it going to take to get him. Now, Beauvillier is a starting point, but it's not going to acquire you Chychrun on his own. If you want to maybe go down to a lower quality defenseman, you might be able to get the deal done. But, the author here, Kevin Kurz, speculates that it's probably going to take Beauvillier, their first-round pick this year, and a prospect. So, possibly one of their, solid young players in the system. Hard to say which one. I don't know if they're going to want a D-man or a forward, but, could it be Bolduc? Could it be Bodie Wild? Could it be a guy like William Dufour, who's in the Memorial Cup right now, putting on a great show, trying to help the Sea Dogs, win that title? Plus, he's won some personal accolades, the Quebec Junior League Hockey MVP this year. He's up for CHL Player of the Year as well. He's having a tremendous season. Then there's Atu Ratu. Is it one of those two guys? You need some youth for the future too. So it's debatable, right? What do you do? Is the price too much? But the Islanders and Lou Lamoriello maybe go in a different direction. It's hard to say. I think Chychrun will certainly make sense in a lot of ways. It just really boils down to that price tag because they really could use a top 6 forward to play with Matt Barzal to create some more offense too. And I don't know that the Islanders really have the assets to make both trades. Now, if they can get one of those players in free agency, would obviously make things a lot easier. They're going to have to make some other deals though to shed some money, whether it's Varlamov, Bailey, Beauvillier, or any of these guys that need to go to kind of create some necessary space. I would imagine Lou is going to be busy with that kind of work like he did last year. He did a great job at that point getting contracts off the books. We'll see if he can do it again here because it's going to be necessary. Free agency might be the better way to go to get the forward. I don't know if they're going to stand a good chance. I'm sure they'll be in the conversation though when it comes to Johnny Gaudreau, Philip Forsberg, players of that nature. Obviously there's going to be a lot of competition for those guys if they hit the open market, so it's going to be tough and no guarantees they get it done, but it makes sense that they'd be in there. I've seen a lot of rumors about the Islanders and Josh Anderson in Montreal. I don't know that there's really a lot to that except for maybe some Islanders media and writers kind of making a wish list here and thinking that Anderson would be good. I don't think it's a terrible idea. I'm just not sure that really for what you're going to get for that contract with him, that it's really the best option. He's not a bad player by any means. I just think they can do better. And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that we saw Anderson play with Matthew Barzal at the World Championships in May, and they had pretty good chemistry. And I think that was part of it. They played a lot, those two with Drake Batherson, and, they did very well together. So I think that's where the conversation comes from. I'm not sure that from the NHL perspective, I'm not sure that there's really a lot there, so we'll see. But the Islanders should be interesting. I don't know what Lou's going to do, but players like Chychrun, Forsberg, Gaudreau, maybe Josh Anderson will be on the radar. I think it makes more sense to try to trade for a D-man if you can, because there's not much out there on the free agent market that you're going to find that's really going to solve what you need, but you might be able to get that forward that way to eliminate how many assets you have to give up to hopefully accomplish both things. But the big trick here is freeing up enough space to make it all happen. That's going to be the tough part. Now, I want to take a look at an article here from Sportsnet from the writer Luke Fox, looking at the Maple Leafs and should they trade for JT Miller. He references the fact that we know that Miller's available. It's not often a top 10 scorer in the league becomes available. We know that he can produce high offensive numbers, play with a lot of grit, a lot of heart, a lot of determination, and a lot of people say that might be the missing ingredient that the Leafs need in their top 6 as a player who can not only give you those big numbers, but to play a different style of game. And I really wouldn't entirely disagree with that. So it kind of goes over the pros and cons of making that kind of deal. So clearly we know the option would be there if they wanted to inquire with the Canucks about making a trade. But what's the price tag going to be? It's not going to be cheap. The Canucks are looking for a lot and for a return on Miller. I think it's fair to say that they're going to want the first round pick of the Leafs for sure. That's an easy starting point. You're probably looking at least one roster player. I'm thinking maybe a guy like Alex Kerfoot, maybe a young defenseman. So either Liljegren or Sandin, and probably a prospect on top of that, whether it be maybe Nick Robertson or Nyes or one of those guys. So I mean, it's not going to come cheap. That is a given. I think the Leafs would need a roster player off for cap purposes for sure. So, you put the Kerfoot contract in there to solve that part of it. I don't know for sure that they want a young defenseman, but, with the Canucks where they're at, kind of makes sense that they would. Then you're looking at one or two pieces for the future. I don't know what the Leafs would prefer to part with versus not. I don't think the first round pick would be completely out of the question, but the prospects might be a little bit tougher to distinguish what they might be willing to part with. Now, of course, the pros and cons here. The pros, it would help them next year because Miller's contract still has one more year left on it. One of the big cons, though, is how do they handle that afterwards? Because clearly, if the Canucks really want more of a young package going back and they don't take on a bigger deal, let's say it's not like a William Nylander type of trade, then the Leafs would have almost an impossibility here of fitting that into the cap without moving out a significant amount of money, and this really makes you wonder, how could they do that, right? Like, you'd end up maybe moving Nylander in a different deal or something. I'm not sure that really makes sense. Miller's obviously a little bit older than some of their younger players, but could be a great complementary piece that they really need. To me, unless you're putting Nylander in a deal, I don't know that it makes a ton of sense. Now, would the Canucks be interested in that? You have to wonder. I mean, he does come signed for a few more years at a cap-friendly number that might be better than what they're willing to pay Nylander, right? Because it sounds like Nylander on his new extension is going to be looking around $9 million based on a 99-point season last year. Well, Nylander's not going to likely give you 99 points, but he might give you 70. And if he signed at 6.9, that might be something that they might prefer to do. Like, to me, and Nylander would make a lot of sense to fit in there. We don't know the future of Brock Besser either. His contract is up as RFA, and his future is questionable at this point too. I do think the Canucks are more interested in retaining him if they can come to terms. That might be the tricky part here. But for the Leafs' perspective, does Miller make sense? To some degrees, yes. But I think long-term there's a lot of risk involved in whether or not they can handle the contract. And not only that, do they want to pay a player of his age a long-term big money deal? Like, that's the same reason the Canucks are considering moving him right now. It's not that they don't like the player, they love the player, but when you look at where he's going to be at with his career and his age and the next contract kicking in, that's their concern. They don't want to get tied up on a 30-year-old plus player, with a 7-8 year deal. That, in Rutherford's opinion and Alvin's, this doesn't make a lot of sense for them with the rest of the team being so much younger. And the Leafs are in a similar boat, really. So does it make sense for the Leafs to do that? I really don't know. Like, unless they can get Miller to agree to a shorter term, I'm not sure. So to me, I'd probably go in a different direction here. I think Miller does make a lot of sense, would be a great fit. I've talked on the channel once before about a potential Nylander for Miller trade, and I think it's worth a conversation. I just, at the end of the day, don't know from Toronto's perspective at least that it makes the most sense. If the Canucks could convince the Leafs to do that, I think it makes a lot of sense on Vancouver's part. If they could get a combination of William Nylander, or even if they get the other aspect here, and if let's say they get Sandin or Liljegren, Kerfoot, and a prospect and a pick, that's also a really good package. So from Vancouver's perspective, the Leafs do make a lot of sense as a trading partner. I just don't know from the Leafs' perspective that's their best option. They do need a player like Miller. I just wonder if there might be some other options out there that might be a little younger, a little bit more cost-effective, that they can really handle here to make this work and to change their dynamic here just a little bit. So let me know what your thoughts are. Would you trade William Nylander for JT Miller if you're a Leaf fan especially? Secondly, if you don't do Nylander, would you do the other package I talked about with a couple of future assets and likely a young player and a roster player, like I mentioned here, like Kerfoot, Liljegren, or Sandin, along with a first and a prospect? Let me know your thoughts on that. We'll discuss down in the comments. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.